Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the invitation to speak in this panel on law and value conflicts in selected areas of social life. My topic is law, traditional values, and digital revolution. At first glance, this may sound a little bit like a standard paper on technology law. But my intention, I would like to suggest something broader. The digital revolution is not only a technical change. It changes the social setting in which law operates. It changes communication, authority, and the way individuals and communities relate to one another. In this sense, it also changes the conditions under which law protects values. My central claim is simple. From the perspective of the Polish constitutional order, but I think not only Polish, the core of these constitutional values are common for other states as well. So from the perspective of the constitutional order, the digital revolution cannot be judged only by efficiency, innovation, or economic growth. It must also be judged in the light of constitutional values. And many of those values are what public debate often calls traditional values, like human dignity, common good, family, parental responsibility, national culture, freedom of conscience, and the continuity of political community. In Poland, these are not only moral and cultural references. They are part of the constitutional structure of the state. This point matters. We must ask whether the emerging digital environment supports the values the Constitution seeks to protect, or whether it gradually reorganizes social life according to another logic: speed, personalization, surveillance, and constant adaptation. The Polish Constitution gives us a clear normative starting point. Its language is not morally empty. It speaks of truth, it speaks of justice, good, and beauty. It refers to Christian heritage of the nation and the universal human values. It also treats dignity, solidarity, responsibility, culture, and the common good as the foundations of the constitutional order. In other words, the Constitution does not imagine society as a neutral mechanism for managing preferences. It imagines a political community held together by values. This means that digital change must be assessed not only as a process of technique, but also as a test of constitutional fidelity. Does it strengthen the conditions of human dignity? Does it support the common good? Does it protect family, life, and cultural continuity? Or does it weaken the institutions and habits on which those values depend? Traditional values are connected with a different social grammar. They depend on continuity, memory, responsibility, and durable institutions. The family is one such institution. So is the nation, so is the local community. All of them are present in the constitutional law and protected by the Constitution. Constitutional law itself presupposes a certain degree of stability and sharing meaning. The digital, by contrast, often rewards speed over duration, immediacy over mediation, and personalized information over the shared public horizon. The question then is not whether digital tools are useful. Of course they are. The deeper question is whether the logic of digitality slowly dissolves the very forms of life on which constitutional values rests. Let me begin with the idea of a common good. The Polish constitutional order is built on the assumption that the political community is more than a collective or private interest. The state is presented as a common good, and citizens are called to care for it. The idea becomes difficult to sustain in an environment shaped by radical personalization. Platforms, electronic platforms, do not address us as citizens, they address us as users. They learn our habits, predict our reactions, and organize our communicative experience around attention and emotional engagement. The more public communication becomes personalized and fragmented, the weaker the common sense for public reasoning becomes. Under such conditions, the common good becomes harder to imagine in practice, even if it remains central in law. This leads to a second problem, the tension between public discourse and digital fragmentation. There is, of course, a hopeful side of digital transformation. It lowers the costs of speaking, publishing, organizing, and networking. It weakens old monopolies over communication. It gives voice to people who were once excluded from public debate. This is the democratic promise of the digital sphere. But there is also a darker side. The same technologies foster closed information communities, narrow horizons, and emotionally charged communication. They encourage what has been called the balkanization of opinion. That is not just a problem of style, it affects the moral structure of public life. If truth is weakened by noise and public discussion turns into competition for attention, then both constitutional democracy and constitutional culture suffer. Freedom of expression remains essential, but freedom detached from truth and responsibility becomes unstable. The digital sphere thus creates a serious tension between liberty, truth, and the integrity of public realm. The third concern is family, childhood, and education. Part of these problems were mentioned in the last brilliant presentation by Professor Syryt. But the Polish constitution gives family life a special place. It protects marriage, parenthood, and the role of parents in raising children according to their convictions. This reflects a basic constitutional intuition. Freedom does not emerge in a vacuum. It is learned and practiced in stable communities of care and responsibility. But in the digital age, education and socialization increasingly take place outside those traditional settings. Children are shaped not only by families and schools, but by platforms, recommendation systems, and algorithmic environments. They encounter models of identity, desire, and conduct in spaces that are global, commercial, and largely opaque. They creates a constitutional question that creates a constitutional question. If parents have a protected role in education, then law must ask whether the digital environment supports the role of steadily weakens it. This is important because education is not just the transfer of information. It is also the formation of judgment, self-restraint, and moral orientation. If digital systems gradually replace the mediating institutions of families, schools, religious communities, and local association, then the problem is not merely pedagogical, it is constitutional. A digital order that weakens those institutions changes the human setting in which constitutional liberty is supposed to exist. A fourth conflict concerned culture, heritage, language, and political continuity. The Constitution treats culture and heritage as sources of identity and continuity. It also linked them to the endurance of the political community itself. This means that culture is not an optional ornament of public life. It is part of the fabric of the polity. Yet, digital globalization tends towards standardization and homogenization. At the same time, it fragments society into isolated micro-publics. So both continuity and cohesion are put under strain. Continuity suffers when inherited cultural forms are displaced by the global symbolic templates. Cohesion suffers when no common horizon remains strong enough to sustain a broader civic conversation. From the constitutional point of view, this means that the digital revolution may weaken the conditions under which the state protects cultural continuity and national identity. The fifth and especially serious conflict concerns dignity, privacy, and surveillance. The Polish constitutional order protects private life, the secrecy of communication, and the autonomy of person in relation to information about himself or herself. This expresses a very clear principle. The person must not be made transparent to power or totally transparent to power without restraints. And yet the digital environment has dramatically increased the panoptic, it is the word derived from the Michel Foucault concept of panopticon. So panoptic is it is observed all the time from the place we don't expect even. So dramatically increased the panoptic potential of technology, data extraction, behavioral profiling, predictive analytics, algorithmic ranking creates forms of observation and influence that are often more subtle and more effective than traditional legal coercion. From the beginning of this year, we have this system of collecting the bills and in Poland, KSEF, yes, and so this is another example of these practices applied by the government in order to have the control of this important aspect of economic life. Yes. The digital world may appear to increase freedom while at the same time deepening surveillance and behavioral discipline. A person may feel autonomous while being constantly guided, measured, classified, and nudged. The real legal question is therefore not only whether formal rights still exist, it is whether digital life still preserves the material condition of meaningful freedom. At this point, we reached what I think is a structural problem of digital modernity. Law no longer regulates alone. In the digital sphere, behavior is shaped not only by statutes and courts, but also by technical standards. In the digital sphere, behavior is shaped by the software architecture, protocols, platform rules, code-based enforcement. These forms of regulation may be global, infrastructure-based, and socially very effective, even when they are not recognized as law in the classical positivist sense. This has two major consequences. First, constitutional values may be displaced indirectly by private or technocratic architecture of control. Second, the real conflict is no longer simply between liberty and state restriction. It is increasingly a conflict between a constitutional order and the values and forms of power that operate beneath, below, or beside visible law. Yes? We don't really know what is happening behind this set. What are they, or which information are collected, what they are doing, what they are preparing with this information, they intending to do with that. This is why I do not see traditional values as obstacles to modernization. Properly understood, they are the standards by which modernization should be judged. Human dignity protects the person from being reduced to data. The common good resists the reduction of public life to preference management. Family and parenthood responsibly resist the silent replacement of education by algorithmic environments. Culture and heritage resist the idea that digital globality is normatively complete in itself. Freedom of conscience protects the inner moral life of the person against both ideological pressure and technological colonization. These are not relics of the past. They are conditions of the human modernity. Let me conclude. The real constitutional question today is not whether law should adapt to digital revolution. Of course, it must. The real question is whether, in adapting, law remains faithful to its own foundations. The digital revolution is not value neutral. It recognizes society according to a logic of speed, optimization, fluidity, and surveillance. Again, against the background, constitutional law must do more than respond pragmatically. It must recall and defend the values on which political community rests. In the Polish context, those values include dignity, common good, family, conscious, culture, and continuity. So the final question is this: will law merely adapt to the digital environment, or will it also shape that environment in the light of constitutional values? Thank you very much for your attention.